Hey guys, welcome back to another great episode on KOB TV, Chattanooga, Tennessee. I am your host, Ken Johnson, and we are talking about reparations and liberation. This is the final part of Liberation Papers. This is the conclusion. And basically what this video is going to tell you is that even if you want reparations, there's a very timely process which you'll learn about in the document, that it's only so far along, and that it'll still have to go to the floor of the House, then the Senate, then signed by the president. And of course, the current president hasn't done that yet, and so I don't think with the options you have in the future that any future president is going to do it anytime soon. So as far as reparations goes, guys, if you are black and live in America, I am sorry to tell you that your only possible chance to freedom, liberation, reparation is to join up with the NFAC and just support the NFAC. If you're not a gun-toting member, you are part of the collective still, and there are needs in this society besides the gun-toting soldier. There are lots of administrative jobs and stuff. So let's go ahead and get right into it, guys. I hope you enjoy this short presentation.
When asked about giving reparations to the descendants of the formerly enslaved, Majority Senate Leader Mitch McConnell said,
I don't think reparations for something that happened 150 years ago, for whom none of us currently living are responsible, is a good idea. We've tried to deal with our original sin of slavery by fighting a civil war, by passing landmark civil rights legislation. We've elected an African-American president.
We've tried to deal with our original sin of slavery by fighting a civil war, by passing landmark civil rights legislation. We elected an African-American president.
Slavery was our nation's original sin. Our Constitution protected it, embodying it in various compromises that gave disproportionate power to slave states. For example, the 3/5 clause counted a slave as 3/5 of a person for population counts. Of course, they weren't considered persons, but property. But that in turn gave disproportionate representation to slave states in the House of Representatives. The Constitution also created the Electoral College, a system of electing the President of the United States that gave slave states another avenue to exercise disproportionate influence over national affairs. It is only fitting, then, that we should hold a hearing today on H.R. 40, the Commission to Study and Develop Reparation Proposals for African Americans Act. My colleague, Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, who is in another hearing right now, she's here with us, thank you. A member of the subcommittee, is the current lead sponsor of this legislation, and I'm proud to be a co-sponsor with her, along with full committee chair Jerry Nadler, also a longtime co-sponsor of this bill. But the greatest credit for H.R. 40 belongs to two individuals. First and foremost, Mr. John Conyers. Mr. Conyers is a former colleague and former chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, a great American and a great leader, one of my mentors. One of the reasons that I have introduced this resolution with him since 2007. He introduced it first 30 years ago. He reintroduced it every Congress thereafter until his retirement. The second individual most responsible for H.R. 40 is sadly, but in reality, John Wilkes Booth. His assassination of President Abraham Lincoln led to Andrew Johnson becoming president. And President Johnson effectively rescinded the promise made by General William T. Sherman to former slaves that they would each be guaranteed 40 acres of land to make a living as a free person. Promise sometimes colloquially referred to as 40 acres and a mule. President Lincoln would have carried that out and had plans to do it. But because of that dastardly day and deed of April 12 of 1865, it didn't occur. April 14 maybe. Anyway, H.R. 40 would create a commission to study the history of slavery in America, the role of the federal and state governments in supporting slavery and racial discrimination, other forms of discrimination against the descendants of slaves, and the lingering consequences of slavery and Jim Crow on African Americans. The commission will also make recommendations as to appropriate ways to educate the American public about its findings and appropriate remedies in light of its findings. An honest reckoning with the federal government's role in protecting the institution of slavery has been a leading priority of my congressional career. In 2007, my freshman year, less than 2 months into that term, I introduced H.Res. 194, an apology by the House of Representatives for its role in perpetuating both slavery and its noxious offspring, Jim Crow. The House ultimately passed this resolution by voice vote, and I once again thank Chairman Conyers for getting it a vote and getting it to the American people. As I noted in my resolution then, it was not just slavery itself that was wrong, but also, quote, the visceral racism against persons of African descent upon which, unquote, American slavery depended, a racism that went on to become entrenched in the nation's social fabric, an evil that we must continue to confront today. My resolution emphasized that while slavery was our nation's original sin, the underlying sin of anti-black racism did not end with the Civil War and the 13th Amendment, and Congress's inaction and acquiescence in the face of such racism was a big reason why. Racism became only further entrenched after slavery's end, as reflected in societal attitudes and in Jim Crow laws, a system of state racial segregation laws that created separate and unequal societies for whites and African Americans, one that was enforced through both official means and through lynchings, violence, intimidation, and disenfranchisement. And not until 100 years after the end of slavery did Congress, under pressure from Dr. Martin Luther King, John Lewis, and other great civil rights leaders in the civil rights movement, finally carry out its duty to end Jim Crow by passing the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that still exists to some extent, and other core civil rights statutes that are fulfilling the Constitution's guarantees of equal protection for all. Today, our nation continues to struggle with the legacy of the anti-black racism that undergirded slavery and Jim Crow. We see this in statistics that paint a bleak picture. According to the Census Bureau, 21.2% of African Americans lived in poverty in 2017, compared to 8.7% of non-Hispanic whites who live in poverty. That's over 2 times as many. The Census Bureau also reported in 2015 that the net worth of African American households was only about $13,000, which was less than 10% of the nearly $140,000 net worth of non-Hispanic white households. Limited access to wealth, building resources, and opportunities have led to this stark disparity. For instance, African Americans continue to face discrimination in the workplace. They have limited access to educational opportunities. According to the National Education Association, the high school graduation rate for African Americans was 67% compared to the nationwide average of 81%. African Americans also continue to face racial segregation in housing and discrimination in the availability of quality health care service and most other major facets of life. Enacting H.R. 40 would be an important step in finding effective long-term solutions to these problems, ones that can trace their origins to our nation's shameful history of slavery and anti-black racism. As the distinguished Professor Charles Ogletree of Harvard Law School once noted, the concept of reparations does not necessarily mean payments to individuals, but rather a focus on the poorest of the poor, including efforts, quote, to address comprehensively the problems of those who have not substantially benefited from integration or affirmative action, unquote. I hope our hearing today can lead to fruitful conversations with the aim of achieving that goal. I thank our witnesses for being here today and look forward to their testimony.
Talk some more.
Identity of H.R. 4 as a legitimate legislative action that should receive the full hearing of this committee, should in fact have a markup, go to the floor of the House, go to the United States Senate, and be signed by the President of the United States of America.
Too many.
This is a
Too long.
action of legislative commitment, and this is not a symbolic action, though I am gratified that we are having this hearing on Juneteenth. And for those of us who understand Juneteenth, 2 years after the proclamation, Emancipation Proclamation, there were those Africans who did not have freedom until 1865. So let me begin and indicate to my friends who have expressed a variety of assessments of H.R. 40 and say that America is a place that welcomes the diversity of thought. We even welcome the diversity of thought among the multicolored chocolate people that are African Americans, descendants of African slaves. Let me be very clear. It is only this group, even though they attempted to enslave Native Americans, it is only this group that can singularly claim to have been slaves under the auspices, the institution, and leadership of the United States government. And so, H.R. 40 is in fact the response of the United States of America long overdue. Slavery is the original sin. Slavery has never received an apology. This commission would be comprised of members selected by the President of the United States, the Speaker of the House, the leader, and of course, those who've been entrenched in this process. I spoke to John Conyers yesterday. I'm honored to have been given the opportunity to lead this bill. John Conyers said to move on and to lead on, and for us to take this forward. Thank you, Congressman John Conyers, for all that you have done. So let me share with you just a sense of what we face. Let me first of all say the number of Africans who died in the Middle Passage, over 2 million. Number of enslaved who died during slavery, first, second, and third generation, over 2.5 million. The transatlantic slave trade was the largest movement of people in history. Between 10 and 15 million Africans were forcibly transported across the Atlantic between 1500 and 1900. At least 2 million Africans, 10 to 15%, died in the infamous Middle Passage, as I said, and another 15 to 30% died during the march to or confinement along the coast. Altogether, for every 100 slaves who reached the New World, another 40 died in Africa or during the Middle Passage. Who has a history like that? Reparations and the idea of this commission should be welcomed by all Americans. For we are not asking one American to give one payment. What we're saying is it's the only way that slavery ended was a governmental action of the 13th Amendment, governmental action. And Reconstruction failed after 12 years because it was imploded by governmental people. And after Reconstruction, a reign of terror that had never been seen. The hanging fruit, the lynching, the oppression of voting, the tearing away of land, and the amazing concept of the continuing de jure and de facto impact of slavery today. 1 million African Americans are incarcerated. That is a continuing impact. The black employment rate is 6.6%, in spite of what has been said currently, more than double the national unemployment rate. 31% of black children live in poverty compared to 11% of white children. The national average is 18%, which suggests the percentage of black children living in poverty is more than 150%, even in spite of the glorious overcoming of the talent that is part of our community the scrapping together of making sure our children received education, the putting together something out of nothing, we still have been impacted. And only 57% of black students have access to full range of math and science classes today. Black children were vaccinated at rates lower than white children. Education mobility has been limited. Black children represent 19% of the nation's preschool population, yet 47% of those receiving more than one out-of-school suspension. Black students are 2.3 times as likely to receive a referral to law enforcement. And we know the criminal justice system. So I conclude by these words. Black people in America are the descendants of Africans kidnapped and transported to the United States with the explicit complicity of the U.S. government and every arm of the United States lawmaking and law enforcement infrastructure. The dehumanizing and atrocities of slavery were not isolated occurrences, but mandated by federal laws that were codified and enshrined in the Constitution. The role of the federal government in supporting the institution of slavery and subsequent discrimination directed against blacks is an injustice that must be formally acknowledged and addressed. I am not here in anger or anguish. I am not in any way seeking to encourage hostilities. There are diverse opinions in this room, and I understand it, appreciate it, respect it, admire it, and love it. I'm a product of my history. I am clearly a child that has walked this path. No, I did not pick cotton. But I will say that those who picked cotton created the very basic wealth of this nation. For cotton was king. There was no other product. And so I ask my fellow colleagues that this is simply a constructive discussion that will lead to the practical responses. And if I might, Mr. Chairman, put this article in the record from the New York Times, dated June 17th.
Well, that's practically
Downtown
it,
boom, Kansas City, Missouri, and just a few blocks away, devastation in the black community. Two cities, mostly in every area. I ask unanimous consent, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection.
Two cities. I also ask unanimous consent to put a statement of support from John Legend.
Without objection.
Two cities, Mr. Chairman. And so let me just conclude by saying I hope that we come in peace. I know that we'll hear from Senator Booker. I thank him. And I thank a number of others who have done this, including the heads of state, scholars, and activists in the Caribbean, playing a leading role in the global reparation movement. Many have been inspired by our work. I'm delighted to see that Professor...
Okay, guys, that is it. Of course, you know I will have the link in the description below, and I'm sure you got something out of it. You always get something out of it. Don't be selfish. Go ahead and share it with someone. Like the video, and if you're new, go ahead and subscribe, and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.
Skinhead, deadhead, everybody gone bad. Situation, aggravation, everybody allegation. In the suit, on the news, everybody dog food. Bang, bang, shot dead, everybody's gone bad. All I wanna say is that they don't really care about us. All I wanna say is that they don't really care about us.